welcome to this exciting event. It's going to be shared widely on various platforms shortly afterwards, so I'm glad that some of you have been able to join us live. This event's on whistleblowing. Now, as you know, the financial cost of corruption in South Africa is difficult to quantify. In 2021, state capture investigator Paul Holden traced almost 50 billion rand from government entities to the Gupta's money laundering apparatus. But the true cost, he warned, is definitely higher. According to Auditor General, most of South Africa's municipalities are in financial ruin, with 26 billion rand of irregular expenditure in the 2019-2020 financial year. Of 247 municipalities, only 27 received clean audits. And even in this time of crisis, money set aside for PPE and emergency healthcare resources is looted, with the former health minister, Twelin Mkhize, making headlines after he and his family benefited from an irregular 150 million rand tender for health communications. Given that the scourge of corruption is now affecting healthcare facilities, and following the assassination of Gauteng Department of Health whistleblower Babita Deokaran, the Future of Health Research Group is proud to present this panel discussion on whistleblowing in South Africa, future prospects for combating corruption. With economies struggling worldwide following the devastating pandemic, and developing countries like South Africa being hardest hit, the human cost of this corruption is unbearable. This money should be spent on infrastructure, on healthcare, schooling, and on service delivery. But the ongoing and systematic theft of public funds has left South Africans quite literally in the dark, with rolling blackouts for over a decade, a healthcare system unable to cope with a growing population, pothole-covered roads, uncollected litter, ballooning class sizes, and the highest levels of both unemployment and inequality in the world. Whistleblowers are absolutely fundamental to winning this battle against corruption. They have a deep understanding of the processes by which money is stolen and who it was stolen by. They often put themselves at great risk, since those they blow the whistle on are very often powerful and influential people. On August 23rd this year, whistleblower at the Gauteng Department of Health, Babita Deokaran, was murdered for helping authorities link senior political figures to irregular procurement deals. She was not the first, and she will probably not be the last. It is no exaggeration to say the future of South Africa depends in large part on its ability to root out corruption, and that this process heavily relies on the cooperation of whistleblowers. But when whistleblowers face such dangers, how can they be expected to come forward? In this seminar, Professor Tina Ace of the University of Johannesburg and Liezl Groenewald, Senior Manager of Organisational Ethics at the Ethics Institute in South Africa, will present on why whistleblowers blow and why it shouldn't matter, and on protecting whistleblowers in corporate South Africa, respectively. These presentations will be followed by discussions with two of South Africa's most prominent whistleblowers, Angelo Agrizzi, former CEO of Bosasa, and Cynthia Stimpel, whistleblower on corruption at SAA, the state-owned airline. Unfortunately, Mosilo Motepu won't be able to join us as she has an important meeting now with a minister. The aim of this event, brought to you by the Future of Health Research Group, is to establish how South Africa can encourage whistleblowers to come forward and ultimately establish a corruption-free South Africa for future generations. Our first speaker is Professor Tina Ace. She is a certified clinical sociologist, is a professor at the University of Johannesburg, South Africa, and the vice president of International Sociological Association. She spent 2013 as a Fulbright visiting scholar at George Washington University in Washington, DC, and at the University of Cincinnati in Ohio. She's rated as an internationally acclaimed researcher by the South African National Research Foundation. Tina is a past vice president of the International Sociological Association, past president of the ISA's Clinical Sociology and Social Psychology divisions, and a past president of the South African Sociological Association. She was a member of the editorial collective of the South African Review of Sociology, and her latest publication is Whistleblowing and the Sociological Imagination with Palgrave Macmillan. Okay, if I may now pass over to Professor Ace.
I've decided to call my talk Whistleblower Motives, Should They Matter? And the reason why I'm talking about this is because we often find that when people talk about whistleblowers and whistleblowing, that they incorporate the definition of whistleblowing into what the motives of the whistleblower are. And I would just like to have a look at that. So I'm going to start by looking at what whistleblowing entails. So the essence of whistleblowing. Whistleblowing is generally defined as the disclosure of perceived organizational wrongdoing to those considered to be in a position to take action. And it's generally done by a member or a former member of an organization who has or had privileged access to an organization's data or information. So somebody who works as an investigative journalist would not be considered to be a whistleblower. It's somebody who blows the whistle about wrongdoing that's happening in the organization that they are a part of. We distinguish between different types of whistleblowing. It can be done internally within the organization to somebody within the organization is perceived to be able to do something about it. It could be externally, where you blow the whistle to some regulator or a lawyer or something in that kind of position. And then we also talk about public whistleblowing, and that is when you place your disclosure in the public domain, amongst others, by contacting the media, and the media then publicizing the whistleblowing. And the basic aim of whistleblowing is to avert harm to the public interest. Organizations generally respond quite negative to whistleblowers. We can distinguish between work-related retaliation and social retaliation. Work-related retaliation can range from subtle indications of displeasure to drastic victimization. And this could include stonewalling, personal harassment, immediate dismissal, or the abrupt downgrading of performance evaluations, what we call in South Africa constructive dismissal, where they move you out of your position into another position where there's no job for you and where you don't actually have anything to do. Character assassination could take place. Disciplinary proceedings generally happen to whistleblowers. And then if the organization is in the position to do that, they could terminate or suspend the person. And often they also go as far as to blacklist this person with other possible future employers. Social retaliation is much more subtle. So it's these practices that organizations engage in to marginalize whistleblowers in the organization. So what happens is that the colleagues and superiors become progressively less friendly. They close ranks against the whistleblower. They see the whistleblower as a troublemaker or not one of us. They start excluding the whistleblower from meetings. And you could even find that the co-workers of the whistleblower that they previously considered to be friends now start avoiding them. Why are employers so negative towards whistleblowers? Well, whistleblowing is, of course, an accusation against the organization because it's an indication that something is going wrong in the organization that the organization has control over. It's also an accusation against co-workers. At the very least, it's a management failure and an inadequacy. It demonstrates the inadequacy of communication channels within the organization. It also causes damage to collegial relationships, to the organization's reputation if it's done publicly, and organizations generally view it as a breach of trust and loyalty. And they generally see the employers and members of the organization as having this absolute loyalty that they have to display towards the organization. So when we start talking about loyalty and that employees are expected to be loyal to the organization, this is where the motives then start coming to the fore. Why is the whistleblower, in inverted commas, betraying the organization from the views of the organization at least? So when we're talking about whistleblower motives, we're talking about the driving force that causes employees to come forward and report wrongdoing. And here again, there's a distinction that is made between altruistic motives and self-centered motives. Altruistic motives are those where the whistleblower feels compelled to disclose information about actions that he or she believes are harmful to society. And they generally do not have any personal interest in the outcome of their disclosure, except that they want the wrongdoing to stop, to be investigated and stopped. So this altruistic, when a whistleblower is engaging in whistleblowing from altruistic motives, it generally is due to a strong investment in personal morality or ethical standards violated by the wrongdoing, and a belief that the public interest is being harmed. On the other hand, you also find self-serving motives, and that is where the whistleblower gets some personal advantage from blowing the whistle. So the whistleblower might expose inequitable distribution of rewards, might blow the whistle because of a personal grievance about something that is happening in the organization, the desire to gain notoriety. It might be because they want to distance themselves from the risk of exposure. Even could be vengeance that they have against some members of the organization or the organization as a whole, or even in the extreme sense that antisocial behavior with the intention to harm others. So these are the whole range of self-interested, self-serving motives or self-interested motives that could play a role. Now let's evaluate these motives. What is important to remember, and generally the view is that if you do it from self-interested motives, then this is not really whistleblowing, that you can't qualify to be called a whistleblower then. It should just be these pure altruistic motives that qualify you to be a whistleblower. But what is important to remember is that even though you might have self-serving motives, this does not preclude your disclosure from being in the public interest. It's also very difficult to determine people's motives unambiguously. You know, often when you think about actions that you've engaged in, it's even difficult for ourselves to determine clearly what our motives were in engaging in a particular activity. Motives can also change during the whistleblowing process. So initially you might start from a more altruistic approach, whereas due to the response that you get from the organization, it might become more self-interested in the sense of trying to protect yourself against the retaliation from the organization. And generally the argument is that when we look at people's motives in engaging in particular activities, those motives generally tend to be mixed, that there's generally a combination of some element of altruism as well as some element of self-serving motives. Benkler argues that one should not use the motives of speakers to determine whether a disclosure is a valid disclosure or whether it qualifies as whistleblowing, but that one should look at the message that the whistleblower brings across. He stated, inquiring into the political or personal motivations of speakers opens the door to the most pernicious form of censorship. The definition of some political motivations as legitimate basis for speech and others as illegitimate and not eligible for protection. Unfortunately, anti-retaliation legislation generally tends to focus on the messenger. If you look at the Protected Disclosures Act, for example, throughout the Disclosures Act, there is a consistent reference to the fact that people need to make the disclosure in good faith. No definition is provided for what is meant by good faith, but people often tend to interpret good faith, this argument about good faith, as an argument that it should be altruistic in nature when you blow the whistle. And this focus on the messenger for me, is problematic. The focus, as far as I'm concerned, should be on the message, not the messenger. What is the message that the whistleblower is bringing? And that message, that disclosure that is made should be investigated. And if it proves to hold water, then it should be addressed so that the corruption or the wrongdoing that it exposes are gotten rid of. And as far as this is concerned, I agree with Alfred, who says that my question is not, was the whistleblower right, pure, just, well-balanced, but what can the whistleblower's experience teach us about the fate of the individual in the organization? To demand that genuine whistleblowers be among the most rational, ethical, well-balanced, and humane of humans would obscure most of what is important by making it impossible to ask the right question. Not who is the whistleblower and is his case sounder than sound, but what can we learn from the experience of the scapegoat is the question I'm interested in. So, yeah. And that is my story. So as far as I'm concerned, the important effort when looking at what whistleblowers disclose is to look at the message that they're disclosing. And then when it comes to protecting whistleblowers, one should also look at the message and make sure that the whistleblower's right to have that message heard should not be limited or avoided. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Prof. Ace. Fascinating talk. Now, because these talks are fairly brief, what we're going to do is move straight through to Liezl's talk, and then we'll start on with sort of a Q&A session led by myself, with which both the speakers and the panelists are welcome to answer. So just to introduce Liezl Groenewald. Ms. Groenewald is the Senior Manager of Organisational Ethics at the Ethics Institute, an immediate past president of the Business Ethics Network of Africa. She is a seasoned facilitator for TEI and IOTA, a guest lecturer at Innsbruck University of Applied Sciences in Austria, and at SA Business Schools. She often speaks at local and international conferences on whistleblowing, comments in the media on whistleblowing, and is author of the Whistleblowing Management Handbook. She is currently, together with the Institute for Business Ethics in the UK, developing a non-retaliation toolkit to assist organisations and whistleblowers. She is furthermore responsible for assessing external whistleblowing hotline service providers in South Africa against the SafeLine X industry standard. Other than serving of several boards and board committees, she is a founding director of the Whistleblower House NBC, and member of the advisory board of the Swedish whistleblowing organisation Vislan. In addition, Liezl represented South Africa at the Global Technical Working Group for ISO 37002 Whistleblowing Management. Liezl, can we hear you?
Thank you, Ben. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm so glad that you all joined us for this very important session, and I'm so glad to share a stage with very important people and courageous people in South Africa. I'm just going to look at a number of things, and I will get there now. That is my question. Do we need whistleblowers? The question is, what would we have not known if it wasn't for whistleblowers? And you can see there, how to steal a bank. We wouldn't have known that. We wouldn't have known about ESCOM, about KPMG, and we wouldn't have had the State Capture Commission, very important people in our society. So quickly, what is whistleblowing? Tina has looked at that. Who typically blows the whistle? Now here I'm going to take a bit of liberty. It is based on research, but still I would really like to know from our panelists whether this research is actually sound or the findings sound. For example, also what motivates a person to blow the whistle, and what are the thought processes in deciding to blow the whistle. I think here Cynthia and Angelo must please assist when we go further with this discussion. The detriment suffered by whistleblowers, Tina has touched on that, and I'm sure that our panelists will also allude to the detriments that they have suffered. I think what is important is how do we manage whistleblowing in an organization? And that is important because if it's not managed in the right way, then we will definitely have victimization and retaliation. So let's look at those briefly. This is not a long presentation. So most scholars agree that there's a few commonalities between whistleblowers. And again, I would love to hear the feedback on this. They agree that it's mostly married people, middle-aged, and okay, let me go to those two first. Married, in the sense then that they feel secure, there is a number one, maybe another income in the household should they lose their job. And number two, they have a family to protect and children and so on to protect. So they would rather blow the whistle. They don't want to be known to their children that you have been involved in X, Y, and Z, or you knew about what was happening, but you didn't do anything. The male and female, the studies differ. In America, it seems to be mostly male or men that blows the whistle, whereas in South Africa, it is mostly female, according to the research. Then we just go through this. Tina has alluded to this as well, is that people feel that they can make a meaningful contribution to the organization. They want the organization to succeed. They have been there in the organization already for a while. It's not the person who comes into the organization and within the first year they blow the whistle. No, the research tells us it takes a bit longer because the whistleblower gets invested, or the person who blows the whistle gets invested into the organization. They have a high commitment to the organization or the company. They want it to succeed. They usually have a higher income, and perform very well in their jobs. And because of their position, they have a feeling of being respected, and they are very often in a powerful position. And our two panelists can attest to that, I'm sure. So having a higher income and being on a, let's say, in a managerial or a higher job performance level, it gives them leverage to blow the whistle more easily. But yeah, we'll see that this obviously isn't always the case. So the typical profile, continuing, is that they feel a strong obligation to take action rather than to compromise their own values. Because if they keep quiet, it's basically, you know, agreeing, my apologies, sorry, agreeing that the unethical conduct in their midst is actually acceptable. And of course, they have strong value systems, so the unethical conduct will not be aligned. These people, our whistleblowers, are also strong people. They are strong, you'll see later, they are extroverts usually, but they're not interested to change their behavior just to conform to the current organizational culture or to the behavior that they see around them, the misconduct that they observe. And they have moral courage. And moral courage basically means that one does the right thing, even in the face of adversary, doing the right thing, even if it is not in one's own best interest. I'm always laugh when I look at this one. The research tells us that our whistleblowers are usually rigid, inflexible, detail-oriented, and prone to linear thinking. Now, that is something that I think is worthy of a PhD thesis. Our whistleblowers typically are also angry at the organization or angry at the perpetrators because they have acted against the ethical principles or values of the organization, against the values of the whistleblower, him or herself, and they therefore angry at the people breaking the rules, and they want to restore the moral order in the organization. Remember, they are vested into the organization, they feel loyal to the organization, and they want it to succeed. So having these people that can put the organization and the sustainability of the organization at risk really, you know, angers them. And maybe, I think, just knowing Cynthia and having read a lot about Angelo, I think a bit eccentric does come into play there. And then, of course, I've alluded to the moral courage that whistleblowers have and must have. So what motivates a person to blow the whistle? There are different factors. There are firstly personal factors. In other words, is the person prone to being proactive or rather a reserved person? Now, when a person is proactive, then the decision is usually, I will say something. If it's a reserved person, our research shows that people will rather keep quiet, won't say anything, and wait and believe that someone else will blow the whistle on what they have observed. Then there are situational factors. In other words, does the whistleblower or the employee feel that they will be protected if they blow the whistle, or do they feel that they will be threatened, that there will be victimization, that they will lose their job, and so on. And then the cultural factors. And this is interesting. It's in the different cultures, in an interdependent culture, people are more prone to blow the whistle, whereas in independent cultures, people do not want to do so because of fear of becoming a social pariah. And then there are, of course, religious factors as well. And I just have this quote from Hennick that says, I have an extremely strong sense of faith and ethics in a Christian context. And I believe at the end of the day, this is what makes me different from a lot of people you find in my organization. I'm a Christian and I have higher obligation to God than to anyone, government or military agency. And my ethics in handling the matter was always of the highest importance to me, because ultimately we are going to answer to God for our impunities. And I was not afraid to answer to God for what I was doing. So in his case, religion was the main motivating factor for reporting. Personal factors, just to come back to that, again, when a person is a bit nonconformist to the collective, they are independent, they have that occupational power that I've alluded to, the higher income, having worked a bit longer in the organization, and basically have an internal locus of control. So doing the right thing because the person believes it's the right thing to do, and not because they are forced because of forced by other pressures. And there's a quote that I like, and Tina has also talked about loyalty and disloyalty. Patricia Harnett, the CEO of the Ethics and Compliance Initiative in America, said, many see whistleblower as a derogatory term for a disloyal employee. But we found that the whistleblower is often forced to go outside, either by fear, inaction, or both. So still you have that strong person and they will speak up. It's just sometimes they cannot do so within their organizations itself. Situational factors refers to the fact that the employee feels that the organization encourages them to speak up. It's what we call a whistleblowing culture, if there is such a thing. The organization makes it easy for them to do to report, because they provide clear internal lines of reporting unethical conduct, and it provides protection against victimization should they blow the whistle. Now, this protection against victimization or retaliation we find in organizations in their whistleblowing policy. And but I still have this doubt, you know, it's words on paper. And words on paper can remain just what it is, words on paper, unless the organizations embrace it and actually show that they do not retaliate against a person. And then another situational factor is the proximity of the unethical conduct to the whistleblower. And here I just have my friend as an example, Bianca Goodson, who, as you know, was the former CEO of Trinidad Management Consulting. And she was shocked that she was asked by the powers that be to sign that 300 million surety for the Bank of Baroda overdraft facility. So it happened quite suddenly, and she reported it to the Trillion Capital Partners, but only to realize that they are all involved. So it's that proximity that, other than the values that she embraces, and I know Cynthia and Angela also, the proximity to that misconduct made her to, is one of the factors that made her to stand up for what is right. And then in terms of the cultural factors, the cultures that, or people that come from interdependent societies such as China and Taiwan and Africa are less inclined to speak up, as it can lead to becoming social pariahs. There's a high degree of collectivism and a great focus on harmony and communal relations and consensus. So people in these cultures would rather talk to each other, but not, can I say, split or snitch, as it's viewed on other people. And then, of course, like we have in Africa, we have a collectivist value system. We are all familiar with Ubuntu. We can only be people through other people. Therefore, we cannot put them, other people, in a situation that would impact negatively again on them and their families and extended families. And in South Africa, I work a lot with corporates, and it's so clear that there's just a concern. People do not want to blow the whistle because they do not want their fellow or their colleagues and their peers and their family to get into trouble, even though it can be to the detriment of the organization, should they not report what they have seen. And then in countries where there's a high degree of individualism, it seems that there's an increase, or people are more prone to speak up, and they're less likely to be influenced by the loyalty of that collective group to whom they belong. Now, yeah, I'm taking a lot of liberty again, but this is according to research that was done in America, is what goes through the mind of a whistleblower. And there's a research done by the Ethics Research Center or Resource Center in America, found that there are various cognitive processes that a person goes through before they decide to blow the whistle. And I just I like this quote that says, whistleblowing itself is the final stage of a process that begins in an awareness of an unethical activity, and it grows and takes shape through the discussions with co-workers to clarify one's initial worries. And there's another quote that I like quite a lot. This comes from research that Katja Fuchs and I did, where a whistleblower said, the positive side, and I'm trying here, how good this person felt even after they have blown the whistle, had the retaliation, lost their job, and so on. This person said that the positive side of having blown the whistle is that you are a positive tool in the story of stopping fraud or whatever you discovered. Now, these are the thought processes or the cognitive processes that the research found, and it's about awareness, becoming aware of misconduct. Of course, within organizations, there also needs to be the creation of awareness about the ethical standards of the organization. So a person that is really tuned into their own value system, the organization's values, they will much easier identify wrongdoing. And then there's this question, this is wrong, I should do something. But it doesn't stop there. They believe then, or the processes go further, and those who decide to speak up believe that the report will make a difference. It's about agency. They have a feeling of safety and personal commitment, security and investment. Security, a safety that they will be protected and supported within the organization, or that they will be protected in the organization, and they're investing again in the organization. Like I've said, they've got this high loyalty to the company for which they work. And then lastly, support and connectedness. And in this case, I think there's been so many disappointments, because it's now, okay, I have now decided I am going to speak up. I can make a difference. I want to make a difference. So who can I rely on for help and support? My family, my manager, perhaps, my CEO, HR in my organization, maybe my religious fraternity. But there are people, I believe, that will support me. And as I say here, I think there's a lot of disappointment that happens for whistleblowers. So Tina has indicated already what makes, basically I call it the triggers. What triggers a person to blow the whistle? And you can see them there. Sometimes it's unfair dismissal. I suppose then we get to the disgruntled part, perhaps, that Tina referred to as well. Jumped over for promotion, having to resign under duress, unfair and wide disparities in reward structures, arrogance of management and leadership. But I think the most important one here, of course, is that a person's, employee's values are challenged. Oh, the English. Okay, now just lastly, how do we manage whistleblowing in an organization, and why is this important? One reason, or research that I've also done, is that together with a colleague, Dr. Paul Foster, found that the number one reason why people don't, or employees don't blow the whistle in an organization is because they fear retaliation. And okay, the second one is they don't believe that the organization will actually do something about it. And therefore, we have to have different avenues in the organization where people can blow the whistle, not just the external hotline run by Deloitte, Tip-Offs Anonymous, or whistleblowers, or any of those whistleblowing hotlines. No, there needs to be different channels, different places where people can blow the whistle, because most might feel comfortable with blowing the whistle to their direct line manager, or maybe rather to the ethics officer in an organization. And here's that research is the Business Ethics Survey of 2019, which found that 42% of employees in corporate South Africa blow or have blown the whistle to their manager. And you can see there the hotline, it's only 2%. And this research is echoed in findings by the Ethics Resource Center, which found that 53% of employees blew the whistle to their supervisors. Now, why is this important? It is important to take it into account because very often the reports end up here with the managers, and the managers have no idea what to do with the report. And then that is where the retaliation starts, because now the manager knows, okay, Liezl blew the whistle. Liezl came to me, blew the whistle on Cynthia. Then I don't know what to do with the report. So I go to Tina, my colleague, and I say, you know what, Liezl blew the whistle on Cynthia. Liezl said Cynthia did X, Y, and Z. What must I do? In that process, the identity of Liezl hasn't been protected, and the information hasn't been treated in confidence. The next thing Cynthia says, well, you know, Liezl was actually right, but I will now retaliate against her. And that is how all those things starts happening. I'm not going to go into that whole the whole process of managing ethics, of managing whistleblowing in organization. But I think I will just end with this, is that an effective whistleblowing management system will ensure that all reports received in an organization are investigated, and that the whistleblower or the employee does not feel the need to go outside and report through the media or the public protector or other avenues. It will build trust in the whistleblowing mechanisms of the organization. People will believe that when they report, the organization takes the report seriously and will do something about it. And in the process, our whistleblowers will be protected from victimization. I end with, okay, these are just resources, but I want to also end with a quote from Alfred that said, "To be a whistleblower is to step outside the great chain of being, to join not just another religion, but another world. Sometimes this other world is called the margins of society, but to the whistleblower, it feels like outer space." Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you for your two talks. And I'd like us to start by addressing some of the issues raised in both the talks. So I'm sure they need no real introduction, but our two panelists, in addition to our speakers today, are Angelo Agrizzi. Angelo Agrizzi was COO of Bosasa. He's author of two wonderful books, if I might say. So, Inside the Belly of the Beast and Surviving the Beast. I highly recommend them. And of course, Cynthia Stimpel, who's also spoken at the Zondo Commission. Both of our panelists have. Cynthia is also an author, has written Hijackers on Board. Also a wonderful read. And if you're into, as it were, whistleblower books, please go ahead and read all of those. Okay, so given a common thing between the two talks, I'd like to bring up the issue of motivations. Starting with a question, a two-part question. Part one is, what are your actual motivations for blowing the whistle? And part two is, has anyone, and by anyone I mean media or people speaking through the media or your opposition in some sense, try to portray your motivations as other than they are? And I don't know, as I said earlier, please just raise a hand, and whoever raises first can answer away. Okay,
Thank
Cynthia.
you very much, Professor Smart. Yes, so what was my actual motivation when I first spoke out? As Tina stated right up front in her presentation and confirmed by Liezl, is that I did it for various reasons. The first, that I was just doing my job. And in my job, I need to follow due process and follow the procedures and policies, which is in my organization. We're all held to that. And what I was seeing, that they were going against these policies and going behind, JIPOing the type of processes that we had. So obviously I had to speak out, which I did at the first level. The first level is my peer group. The second level is those next senior level managers, which were the executives. So I did try to stop it there. And my own boss, who was doing it, at the time, because she was new, I actually felt sorry for her, and I thought maybe she doesn't understand our processes. I even gave her copies of the policies, and I went to explain it to her. So that was my first instinct, that she didn't understand. She was probably just going gung-ho. But the second time is I saw this was deliberate, that they wanted to bypass the policies, and then I took it another level out. So it was based on just doing my job. It was also that I was in a senior position where I could do something about it. And I also felt that if I didn't do something, I couldn't live with myself. It means I was being complicit in something that I know is wrong and allowing it to happen under my watch. And it was also against my own personal beliefs and my values. So it's that there's many spheres of it. So that's what motivated me to speak out. On your second question, Prof. Smart, was on what did the media do, or how did they portray me? So the first media statement that came out from the Business Day after I was suspended was defiant treasurer, you know, stands up against SAA. But as you read further, when the SAA's spokesperson then, because they get interviewed, they then say, I committed misconduct. So it's never about the issue. And I like what Professor A said earlier on when she said, it's not about the messenger, it's about the message. No one was listening to the message that there was an issue going on, that we were transgressing our policies and procedures, but rather here's this defiant treasurer. And so my face became the front page rather than my message. So yes, so I believe that we do need the media. Because I believe too that the media has some form of protection for whistleblowers. On the other hand is that I feel the media also needs to see both sides so that they can depict the story correctly, what the message, the true message is, and not that messenger. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Cynthia. And I'm just going to pass the same question over to Angelo, if I may.
I think, professors, thank you very much for having me as well. It's indeed an honor and a privilege to be here. And thank you, Professor Smart, for arranging everything and tying everything together for us. And, you know, the reason I decided to whistleblow, it actually started long before. It started getting uncomfortable in the company right in, I'd say, 2014 already, where, unfortunately, there just wasn't the opportunity. And, unfortunately, the president had been captured, and Dudumiani, most of the ministers had been captured, and we had a situation where even the NPA had been captured, Sean Abrams and Malcoba Jiba and Lawrence Mrebi. So they'd all been captured. So who did we report it to? And the very same question was put to the president. He was the deputy president at the time. Why didn't he report on it? And unfortunately, you know, when you're in the thick of things, it's very difficult. But for me, the moment came in August 2016, where I actually had resigned from the company. And it had happened because I'd realized that this has just gone too far. They were buying cattle for the president at that time, Zuma, and it was just getting totally out of kilter. People were kicking back. Whenever you tried to enforce policy, it became a free-for-all. Everybody was doing what they wanted. And eventually, morally, I had to say, listen, that's it, and goodbye, I've had enough. Unfortunately, I came back. I was enticed back, given golden handcuffs, and I then ended up, you know, eventually leaving on the 16th of December, never going back. My actual service was terminated with the company in the following March, and I then decided, look, I'm going to go and whistleblow, and I needed to find an avenue to do it. And I knocked on doors. We approached the Hawks. We submitted affidavits. Absolutely nothing happened. I'd even gone as far as to go to Willie Hofmeyer at the NPA. Nothing happened. We had approached various other people. Nothing happened. Eventually, as a matter of desperation, on the 21st of August 2018, I put out an email to the press, and fortunately, Frank Dutton from the Commission of State Capture picked up on it, as did certain people in the Hawks. I must tell you that. And I started working with them, and then they just disappeared. And I didn't get to hear much from them, maybe because they were dealing with the attorneys, I don't know. But I eventually decided that, look, the way I needed to go and the proper platform would have been the Zondo Commission. And that's where we offered our testimony at the Zondo Commission. Would I do it all again? Yes, I would, most definitely. And I think every single one of the whistleblowers, unfortunately, we've lost one or two along the way, but they would all be the same. In terms of the media support, you know, the media, I believe we need a good and a strong media in South Africa, but I do believe that the media is sometimes one-sided and that they're also a business and they have to get in funds through advertising and ratings. So sometimes, in my experience, they kind of make you out to be a villain and not actually publish all the facts. They don't publish incorrect facts, they publish the facts, but they don't give all the facts and the truth of the matter. And that's the one issue that I've picked up with the media. Have people use the media as well to try and discredit whistleblowers? Most definitely. Most definitely. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you very much. Let's move on to the next question, if we may. By the way, our other panelists, Liezl and Tina, if you have any questions, feel free to ask yourselves. Just raise your hand to ask a question, as it were.
Will do.
Okay. This one's more general, and it comes following the death of the Gauteng Department of Health whistleblower. I want to ask you both: have you ever felt like your lives were at risk as a result of you being a whistleblower? And obviously, feel free to tell your story there. And to what extent do you think this prevents people from blowing the whistle?
Look, I've got to the stage in my life where I don't fear death. I fear not being heard. I fear the truth not getting out there, and that's my biggest focus. Am I scared? I wouldn't say I'm scared. I'm very cautious in what I do and how I do it. Have they tried to kill me? Yes, they have. I write about it in my book. If you've read my book, you'll read about it. I don't want to spoil it for other people, but it's evident. The evidence is there. It's on the website. I've posted all the medical records. Everybody can see exactly what was going on. I didn't end up in ICU for 52 days because I chose to, and nor did I end up there because my family chose to. I was left to die on a gurney outside Baragwanath Hospital, and that's the facts. That's the truth. So yes, I do sometimes. I'm concerned, but am I fearful of an attack on me again? Well, I don't think. I honestly don't believe there could be anything to me. I serve a greater God, and He protects me all the time. So, you know, I've been back from the dead 3 times. They call me Lazarus at the hospital. So I'm sure I'm here to live and to tell the story forever.
And the second part of my question, Angela, I wondered whether you think there would be more whistleblowers if people weren't afraid. I mean, I wonder about Mr. Makashuli's former secretary. Just now has said that she won't be a state witness, and of course I don't know what really happens, but you know, one wonders whether she's refusing to for the sake of fear or for the sake of self-preservation.
You know, Prof. Smart, there were 38 whistleblowers in total with 7 of us. Okay, so there were 38 whistleblowers who never came to testify. And the reason they didn't come to testify is purely because of what happened to us. If you recall, I had my first set of testimony. We then were asked to stay behind because I was due to go on holiday. Within 2 days, we were arrested. I was told by the arresting officer, and I make it clear in the book as well, that I should not have gone to the Zondo Commission. If I had not gone to the Zondo Commission, I would not have been arrested. That's very interesting. And it's in the book, and I haven't been challenged yet by the arresting officer or by the NPA. I actually would love them to challenge me, and I actually would love someone to challenge me on the facts in the book. Nobody has. The fact of the matter is that the whistleblowers would have come forward. They were prepared to come forward. They were ready to give their testimony. We had actually physically paid for attorneys to do their affidavits and everything. But as soon as they arrested us, they put a block on whistleblowers in South Africa in general. That's what they did. They ruined it. They ruined a golden opportunity to get more whistleblowers out there to start uncovering the rot that has engulfed this country. So they have themselves to blame.
Thank you. And Cynthia?
Thanks, Prof. Smart. I agree with Angelo, is that we all have a civic duty. Firstly, it's in our constitution to speak up and speak the truth if we observe any wrongdoing. The second thing is that DCJ Zondo had made a public call to all citizens to come and speak out. So all Angelo was doing, his civic duty, yet he was retaliated against. Currently, right now, we have 2 whistleblowers from PRASA who have done their civic duty, have gone to Zondo Commission, and they are being retaliated against, and they are also being sued, which is against everything. You can't even comprehend how those board members can be doing that. So for me, again, going back onto the threats of whistleblowers, it is what happened to Angela, what's happened to Babita, who was also just doing her job, firstly, and her civic duty, was killed. It's execution style. And all I could think of was this daughter of hers at home. How callous can you be, you know, to know that this person has some information, and I don't care whether she has a family, has children or anything. So those threats are very valid. It's also preventing more whistleblowers to speak up, which is what we're trying to do, is encourage people to speak up, because how else are we going to combat corruption? The reason why Liezl started her whistleblowing house, I started Citizens of Conscience, many other NGOs like Active Citizens Movement, Ahmed Kathrada, Outer, Corruption Watch, all want to encourage people to speak out. And so it's again around those threats. And I believe if we all stand together as citizens, as a bigger unity of South Africans, we can then start combating the corruptions. In my own case, was I threatened? At the time, no, I wasn't, but I was followed around for about a month or so, and then nothing. But more recently, something strange happened. I had a visitor from someone who I didn't know at the time until I Googled the person, and they closely related to Miss Mayeni, Dudu Mayeni. And only then I realized, obviously, this is a warning for me that we know where you live and we know how to find you. So I'm taking that very seriously. And like Angelo, I'm being very cautious when I drive, where I go, and just totally observant. So that's a veiled threat, the way I see it. The question around would there be more whistleblowers? Again, I would like to use this forum, and whenever I speak, I would like to encourage whistleblowers. I know right now that our legislation isn't there not to protect whistleblowers. We know that companies, because of their own personal reputation or the involvement in corruption, they want to quiet things down. They don't want it to get out into the public space. But the only way for us in South Africa to stop and stem the corruption is for us to start speaking out. So that's what I would like to encourage. Thanks, Professor.
I actually have a question for our speakers. So we spoke much about what makes someone be a whistleblower, and some of the research that you had done, Liezl. I wonder if you've also done research on what prevents people from being a whistleblower. I'm not sure how one identifies a non-whistleblower that's worth speaking to, but I wonder if that research is out there, if you've come across anything.
Yeah, thank you. Prof, I see there's also a question in the Q&A. It's maybe at some point you just want to look at that. Yes, there are a number of reasons, and of, like I've said, the fear of victimization, that is just, it's there. And it doesn't help that we have Angelo's story, that we have Cynthia's story, that we have Babita Dukaran. I mean, nothing of these stories, I think, would motivate a person to actually, speak up. There's also the thing that, well, like I've mentioned before, they believe the organization will not act, so why bother? And in those cases, they then usually go outside of the organization. And another thing, and this, yeah, is that they, from the research that I've done or we've done, is that they don't believe they can truly report anonymously. Now, if you have effective systems in place, then that anonymity can and is guaranteed. And again, that is where we get to the message and the messenger, where even if, when a person blows the whistle anonymously and that report is not handled in the right way, then you can get the situation where the manager or whoever decides, let's just find out who is this anonymous whistleblower. So that's another reason. Then there's also a fear of being viewed as a troublemaker in the organization. Maybe someone that is not in a higher level in the organization. They're part of a team, maybe on a middle management level, and they don't want to be ousted out of that group. And then, of course, the fear of loss of job. There are so many stories, we know that, where people lose their job, where are disciplinary cases made against them. So yeah, they're fearful of that. And then, of course, there's another one, that people either believe that's just the way it's done, so they cannot do anything about it, and then they don't know who to tell. Where do I go to first? So those are some of the main reasons why employees don't speak up.
Thanks. And would anyone else on either on the panel or Prof. Ace like to contribute? We'll start with Prof. Ace.
Yeah, I think what I generally found with my research, I started doing research on whistleblowing in about 1995. And so that was way before the Protected Disclosures Act existed, or before anybody knows what whistleblowers were. And the reason why I got involved in it was because my husband was a whistleblower. And I didn't know what was happening. I couldn't understand why his organization was responding to him in the way that they did. He thought he was doing his job, like Cynthia said. He thought, this is what they expect me to do. If I see something is going wrong, that I would raise concerns and I would take it, but they were not at all happy about it. And then a colleague gave me an article to read, and I realized this is actually what whistleblowing is about. So in a lot of instances, when it comes to people, initially when it came to people blowing the whistle, they didn't know they were blowing the whistle. They didn't know there was that kind of name. Now, of course, today, there's a lot of information. Whistleblowing is in the news all the time. And I think so people know that disclosing information is whistleblowing. But if the problem is this, if you're part of an organization and you want to continue being in that organization, that this whole idea of accepting that there are fraudulent people in your organization, and there might even the situation that the whole organization is fraudulent. And then it becomes a situation where you actually have to realize as a whistleblower that you will have to stop working there. You need to disclose this information, but you won't be able to continue working there. It's very interesting, when the Protected Disclosures Act was initially introduced, a lot of organizations started having these hotlines with the idea that you could, that people were then forced in order to qualify for their disclosure, to qualify as a protected disclosure, they needed to go via the hotline in the organization if there's a system within the organization. Otherwise, there were stronger rules in place if you go to the media, for example. And the argument that was often taken was that organizations implement those hotlines, but they're more interested in whether employees are stealing from them, like banks, for example, than whether the organization is actually acting against the public interest. And that is one of the problems that we have with whistleblowing, that when I talk to whistleblowers about protection, I always cringe when people say, oh, we've got this wonderful legislation that protects whistleblowers, when we all know that that legislation is worth very little. And we've got so many examples of whistleblowers that I've interviewed and that I've read about in the news about how they don't actually get protected, how that legislation doesn't actually protect them. So it becomes very complicated if we want to ensure that we promote whistleblowing as a way of addressing corruption. How do we, and other forms of wrongdoing within an organization, how do we ensure that those people who have the courage to come forward and to disclose information about it don't bear the brunt of the anger of the organization against them?
I think Angelo had a hand Oh, and Liezl has 2. So let's go with Angelo first, previously, because I think it was first.
I think one of the things that I failed to mention is the attack on whistleblowers by this very same state agencies. I mean, at the moment, we have a major attack from state agencies such as SARS. SARS have put in a claim against me of 230 million rand. And basically what they've done there is they've just fictitiously manufactured a claim. So what they've done is they've taken debits and credits into my account and just lumped them all together and says, oh, well, that's all income, and we're going to tax him going back to 2002. We have another whistleblower who's been tax compliant all these years. He just had yesterday had his bank account closed and all the money in his bank account. This is a man with 3 children, still taken out by SARS. And the attack is only on the whistleblowers who appeared at the Zondo Commission, and purely because they uncovered the malfeasance with one of their consultants at SARS. So now SARS is hitting back. And we've tried absolutely everything. We have top consultants, tax consultants, that have cost us 3-4 million rand to prove the matter. And yet SARS are sacrosanct and they can attack whistleblowers. The same thing goes with the NPA, with the Hawks. They feel that they are sacrosanct and they can just do as they please. So that's a big problem. And if we committed, if this country is committed to whistleblowers and shows that they're committed to whistleblowers, then stop attacking whistleblowers and start working with whistleblowers. It's unbelievable to see the attack on all the various whistleblowers that are out there. Not only the Bosasa group, but various other whistleblowers as well. I don't think people realize that we actually paid our own legal fees for the Zondo Commission. There was no contribution from the Zondo Commission for our affidavits and our legal fees that went with it. That was paid out of our own pockets. I don't think people are aware of that.
Thank you. And Liezl, you had a hand.
What I wanted to say now sounds a bit lame after what Angelo has said, but I actually want to ask him a question as well. Just to respond to what Tina has said, you know, in terms of our Protected Disclosures Act and I say its uselessness, is that the EU directive that on whistleblowing that becomes compulsory on the 17th of December this year. It's applicable to all organizations with 50 employees or more in Europe or in the European Union. They have to have whistleblowing mechanisms in place. But what I love about it, and I wish, Cynthia, maybe you guys must take this forward, that when an employee or whistleblower is retaliated against or victimized, the burden of proof is on the organization to show that they haven't victimized the whistleblower. Instead of now whistleblowers, you know, in South Africa, we have all whistleblowers have to prove that they have been retaliated against. So I think that will go a long way, I hope, in you know, organizations in the EU being a bit more what's the word, cautious in how they handle reports that they receive. And then Angela, Ben said in the beginning, we can also ask you questions, and I think it will be interesting for our audience to understand how much money have you guys spent on your legal fees from your own money, just to demonstrate that, yeah, being a whistleblower comes not only with the other price, but with that kind of a price as well.
Okay. Legal fees are well over 9 million rand at the moment. They've been paid by us. We've cashed in our pensions. We've cashed in everything that we have. We've also had to support other whistleblowers that did not get money. We had to support them. We've sold cars. We've sold everything. It just means it's not only about the legal fees. It's also about auditors' fees. I mean, to sort out the SARS, to explain the matter to SARS. You see, so they create a problem where there's no problem, and they then know that they're going to weigh you down financially. And there I have to take on actually, there's a leading judge that was involved in all of this, and I will take him out eventually. I will expose him, because it's wrong what they are doing. But just to get the SARS matter resolved, you're looking at close to about 3.5 million rand, and we haven't even got close to court yet. So that just gives you an indication. That's nearly 13, 14 million rand that has gone out. That is what we've worked for all these years. I'm not even going to go into my health or what my health costs on a monthly basis because of what they did to me. But this is all the repercussions. People have lost their jobs. They've lost, families have lost their houses. We have to stand in for them. I can tell you now, just this whistleblowing exercise has cost us in total about 15, 20 million rand.
What about people? And what about those people who cannot afford that? Where do they end up?
You see, that's exactly what the system wants. The system knows that it's going to, that they try and erode their financial base. And this specific judge, in a 417 inquiry, overheard him saying to them, get whatever you can out of them now, because they're going to use their war chest. I mean, that's despicable. That's from somebody you should be looking up to. How do you say that to somebody? I mean, we've just seen the masters, three masters have been suspended because of nefarious dealings with liquidators. Those are the people that we should be exposing as whistleblowers, but people don't want to come forward anymore because they're scared. People are scared.
Cynthia, you had a hand?
Yes, thank you. Just to add on, there's a whole network that is involved here. So you have, within an organization, you have those board members who know that they've done something wrong and they're not being held accountable. There's the CFOs and CEOs who hold duties, they have fiduciary duties to their organizations, and they are still not held accountable. The whistleblower lone voice speaks up, and suddenly they're the ones that are victimized, thrown out of the company, suffer losses. The case in point that Liezl just mentioned, Masimba Dawa, Dr. Masimba Dawa, qualified PhD, refused to sign and change an existing procurement contract that Dudu and Ms. Kwenana forced on him, Dudu Mayeni and Ms. Kwenana. He didn't want to do it. He was fired and he lost his home. He cannot even put his children through school now. I mean, it's that type of thing because he didn't even have the funds to pay for lawyers. Besides that, we have currently, and I'm going to go back to PRASA because it's a current case. The recent CFO, Zolani Matthews, has just been suspended. Yet that whole board, Ramatlakane and all that board, they are delinquent. Who then charges them as delinquent directors? Who do we report to is the question I ask. Must it always be, so we have to take it to civil society, they have to take it? Why can it not be seen and the NPA can see that something's wrong and act on it? And they continue. So at the moment, why do they have deep pockets? Why can they extend their litigation on the poor whistleblower? Because they are using state funds or they're using the organization's funds, for instance, that they can spend all that money irrespective and continue this role of victimization. Then there's the others, even smaller organizations are doing it now. For instance, a recent case was of the National Lottery. That's come up before that there's fraud. It's coming up again and surfacing again. And why hasn't any of our state-owned entities who have the ability, like the NPA, the IPID, the Hawks, go and investigate? They don't, because they're either part of it. So how then do we solve this problem? And whoever notices it, says something, they lose their jobs. And yes, so we need to fight for our legislation. We need to then get that changes made whereby the whistleblower should not be touched at all. He should have his job, plus he should have equal access to the same lawyers. If that company gets a Weber Wenzel, that whistleblower should get a Cliff Decker, an equal, on par legal, and it must be paid by that same organization. That's how the legislation will be changed. They'll think twice before they start victimizing that whistleblower. The other issue that whistleblower needs to be protected from a mental and physical health. We've all seen the toll it takes on us on our physical side and our mental health and the repercussions on our families. And with the financial, You may not even feel the financial, but when you know you can't meet that bond, that bill, it plays on your mind, and that's how you end up with mental illness. So it's all knock-on effect with all these issues. So it's far broader than we just saying speaking out and creating the safe space. We're going to have to build huge mechanisms to protect that whistleblower, equal and on par what that company is getting. Because right now, if you look at PRASA, there is no trains that are moving. No, it's supposed to be a passenger trains, right? No one can get on the trains. The rails are all disappearing, yet they're using the budget that's been given to them by National Treasury on what? Not on improving the company, not on ensuring that passengers have the transport needed, but rather on litigation. That's wrong. It is just so wrong. Thanks.
Very interesting couple of answers to a quite simple question. Thank you so much. Right, I now have a question from Roland and Pofu of the Sunday Independent. It concerns Mr. Agrizzi, but I'm not going to address it to Mr. Agrizzi initially, at least. Okay, so anyone else is welcome to answer, but not Angelo at this point. In your definition of a whistleblower, can Mr. Agrizzi be a whistleblower yet? He only revealed things at the Zondo Commission. Not sure that's entirely true, given the books, but in any case. In short, disclosing corruption at a commission can be, or can disclosing corruption at a commission be called whistleblowing? Good question. And the second question, what are the ethical considerations before one can blow a whistle? Okay, so that can go to anyone else until, unless, except Angelo, and then we'll allow Angelo a go afterwards.
I think the reason why I started with the definition of whistleblowing is because there is often a huge debate about whistleblowers and whether somebody disclosing the information could actually be considered to be whistleblowing. And what often happens is that it's one way of discrediting the whistleblowers by saying, you're not really a whistleblower. That's what happened with Edward Snowden as well, for example. You know, that there was this whole debate about he's not really a whistleblower, he's a traitor, or whatever the case may be. And that's often a way in which organizations respond to whistleblowers to try and discredit them and discredit the message that they're bringing across by saying they're not really a whistleblower. Now, as far as I'm concerned, and as far as the literature is concerned, you're defined as a whistleblower if you disclose information about perceived wrongdoing to somebody who's in a position to take action. So somebody who's in a position, who you think is in a position to take action. So the Zondo Commission, obviously, is in a position to take action. So disclosing information to the wrongdoing to the Zondo Commission does qualify as whistleblowing. One other thing that people often do is by saying that you're not a whistleblower if you have the wrong motive, you know, or you didn't do it in good faith. And then there's a whole complicated way of determining whether it was in good faith or not. And organizations typically try to discredit the whistleblower by saying they didn't do it in good faith, or they had self-interested motives, or they were actually involved in the wrongdoing and they're just trying to protect themselves. And therefore people shouldn't listen to what they have to say. But I mean, even if somebody was involved in the wrongdoing and they have the courage to go and disclose that information to try and address that wrongdoing, I think that should be recognized and such a person should be considered to be a whistleblower. As far as the ethical, in the initial literature on whistleblowing, there was a whole focus on ethical issues. What would qualify for a whistleblower to be ethical, for whistleblowing to be ethical? Lately, more recently, I think the emphasis has moved a little bit away from that focus, and generally disclosing information of wrongdoing is considered to be the ethical thing to do, rather than having all sorts of requirements that the whistleblower needs to comply with before it can be considered to be ethical. But perhaps Liezl is seems that she works at the Ethics Institute, can be talk more about the ethics aspect.
Maybe just come in there quickly. Sorry, Cynthia, just to perhaps respond to that. Now, It's all in terms of the ethical considerations. In my opinion, it is about what is my duty. You know, from a deontological perspective, I have a duty to do the right thing from a moral point of view. And then secondly, excuse me, I need to do, if I don't speak up, it will have a negative effect. It will harm other people. So what I need to do is to speak up for the greater good of my family, the greater good of society, of the country, of my workplace. But I must try to cause the least harm to the smallest number of people. And that is all I'm going to say on that aspect now.
Thanks. I'll go now. My case is that my charges were that I didn't whistleblow, that I didn't follow the internal whistleblowing process, and therefore I wasn't a whistleblower. That was my charges. Yet I have proven record that I went internally first to seniors, and then I went externally to my shareholder, which is National Treasury. So yet I was charged with not whistleblowing. It's in my charges. Anyway, to go on the range of whistleblowers, there's a spectrum of it, which Dave Lewis had said in one of an earlier presentation that he did at the timing of whistleblowers. And I agree with Professor Ace that it's just speaking out when you see there is a wrongdoing, and to someone who can effect change, take action, or do something about it. And most times it's our next peer level, which is our bosses, the CFO, the CEO, the executive, or your board. And it's the very board that could be part of the culprits. And so where do you go next? You need to go outside the organization. Someone like Suzanne Daniels, her case was she was involved, she was part of management team, and she saw at one stage, questioned it within her team, questioned it around her peer level that what we're doing is not right. It was when they all just continued, and I recall that she refused to sign a document. Everyone signed it and said, well, it makes no difference. Everyone signed it, and that's how she ended up signing a certain document. However, when she realized the implications, she went and reported it to Parliament. So does that make her whistleblower? Does that make her, how deep was she in? Was she complicit in part of the corruption, etc.? It's those type of questions I feel that that person stood up and had the courage to speak out. Yes, you see what's going, you have your own internal deliberations, you take it normally to your inner peer circle and then your next level management. But if nothing happens there, you need to step up, and which is that courage which you take. And so that's happened to many. Many have a different story of different levels of when they whistleblow. Some do it very early, some do it in the middle, towards the end. From an ethical perspective, obviously we've talked about that, but it's how one views it, and to start saying, but someone did earn from it, or they were involved in it, and now they spoke out. It's when you just see how much damage is being caused around you, what if this continues, what more can happen? And so for me, is I just feel I have a simple definition. It's a person who just speaks out of any wrongdoing. And that to me is how I see whistleblowing. I'm not going to define it any further. At the level you realize that, you know what, I need to do something now, is when you become that whistleblower. In my story, I knew there was something wrong from December, which I discussed with family. I discussed it with my internal team. But when I physically had to do it in writing was 6 months later, because you keep trying to change things internally and you're hitting this brick wall, and then you have to raise the bar higher and then go external. Thanks.
Thank you. So the consensus, I believe, from the panel is that Angelo is very welcome to call himself a whistleblower, but I wonder if Angelo would like to add something.
Sorry, most definitely. I'm going to answer. Ronald's asked a very important, I think it was Ronald that asked the question. He's asked a very important question. The answer is quite simple. Who was I to report it to? Jacob Zuma had been captured by Bosasa and Gavin Watson. Ngoba Jibe had been captured, and so had Lawrence Mrevi, and probably half the cabinet as well, who are proved to be corrupt. Who was I to report it to? The second question, the second part of my answer is, a whistleblower will put himself at risk in order to bring out the truth. And that's what it's about. That's what whistleblowing is about. Because in actual fact, we put ourselves at risk, and at grave risk. I refused to take a 50 million rand bribe that was offered to me in black and white, drawn up by a legal firm, Hogan Lovells, drew it up, presented it to me, 50 million rand to shut up and not to go to Zondo Commission and to retract the press statement that I put out. I think that explains what whistleblowing is about. And to me, was I involved and complicit in a corrupt company? I was involved and I was complicit. Did I personally pay bribes out? No, I did not. I did not arrange bribes for anybody. But a whistleblower is somebody who goes out there to tell the truth. It's somebody who informs people in authority or the public that what is happening is wrong and illegal, and that's exactly what we did as whistleblowers. You see, unfortunately, the media painted a picture, and it was exactly that to try and discredit whistleblowing that they used and they tried to manufacture against me. I'll give you another example. If you have a look at the cross-examination between Reg Willis, who acted on behalf of Kevin Wakeford, and myself, nowhere do they dispute the facts that there was a largesse received by the consultant, Papadakis, for SARS, or by the consultant for Home Affairs from Bosasa. But what they do is they attack me on everything else but the fact. So that explains it itself as well. Okay, I trust that answers the question.
Thank you very much. Yes, it does. Before I move on to my next question, I'd just like to invite participants to type questions in the Q&A, and I'll try and ask those to the panel. But in the meantime, I want to ask this next question. So we've all seen some whistleblowers, Mr. Agrizzi is the prime example, I think, being arrested and escorted in police vans with great pomp and circumstance, surrounded by, SAPS motorbikes and so on. And yet, many of those fingered by the whistleblowers, like Dudu Mayeni, who's pointed out in Cynthia's book, of course, continue to enjoy their freedom and to a large extent are celebrated by a huge proportion of the population. I couldn't believe it this year when I think Dudu Mayeni was giving a keynote address at some either ANC Youth League or ANC Women's League event for Women's Day or something along those lines. I wonder why this happens and whether we can end it. In other words, the fact that the whistleblowers seem to be getting the raw end of the deal, and those that are fingered are still enjoying not only public life but popularity.
I'd like to tell you a little, not a story, it's what happened, it's fact. Dudu Mayeni, there was a raid arranged to go on, there was a High Court authority, a search and seizure warrant, arranged by a judge in Gauteng, and it was due to go down with a whole set of hawks. I think there were 7 hawks, together with one other whistleblower who testified, Richard LaRue. And the reason for them going down to Mpangeni was to investigate and collate information regarding to a largesse she had received of security cameras and that type of thing. You will not believe it. The raid, they drove down there, the whole team of them, booked into accommodation at taxpayers' expense, not bad accommodation either. What then happened was there was a discussion amongst the hawks there to say, well, let's just get rubber stamp this and use a local magistrate to rubber stamp this warrant. The next morning, they appeared at Dudu Mayeni's house. Apparently, she was not there, but the security guy who looks after her house was there, and he got on the line to Dudumiyeni. One call later, the whole search raid was called off. That explains the impunity that we have in this country. And you will not believe it. The same prosecutor who's working on our case is the prosecutor who called off the raid, who phoned the Hawks at the site and says, "You're not going to search Dudumiyeni." He defied a court order. Now you explain to me, if we don't live in a captured state to today, and that was in 2020, a year ago. I mean, that's the impunity that's going on. The prosecutor that's prosecuting us is the same prosecutor who picks up the phone, who phones up Dudumiyeni's, the Hawks, and says, "Leave the premises, you're not searching and you're not seizing anything anymore." A waste of time. I hope that gives you some clarity into what the situation is at the moment and the impunity that people play with, and yet the attack is on the whistleblowers.
I don't understand how the prosecutor would have the authority to make that decision. I mean, I'm not a lawyer, which is probably why, but I don't understand how they was in a position. If it's a court order, it's a court order, is it not?
And that's exactly what it is. It's a question I've put, and I think those who've read the book have seen. I have made no bones about it. I've openly discussed it and put it in the book that is what happened. To today, the NPA have still not answered the question on why that happened and what gave him the right to defy a court order from a judge.
And if I may add to that we've done the whole delinquent director case against Ms. Dudumiyeni, yet she is still a director of the Jacob Zuma Foundation. And yeah, she hasn't retracted. And I know I've read that finding that they had to take it for a criminal case, but no criminal charges has been gone against her yet. So go figure.
I'm worried that we're going to end up in a very pessimistic outlook at the end of this session. So
we hope not.
Angela, is that a new hand?
No, sorry, that's an old hand, and I'm sorry there's a bit of a negative outlook, but I'm just giving you the facts as they are.
Mm. So, well, let me ask a related question. Well, I don't feel like I got a full answer to the original question. I wonder why does Dudumiyeni still enjoy such popularity among the general public, and Jacob Zuma and Ace Makashule and all these other people that have been, by the way, you know, in no way am I asserting their guilt. These are things under investigation, but nonetheless they are accused, and yet they continue to enjoy extreme popularity amongst a huge proportion of the population. Why is this? In the UK, politicians have to resign the moment they, you know, fart in public. You know, you can. It seems like the rules just don't. Those rules just don't apply over here. Like, what's going on?
Stalin's chicken. That's what's going on. People are just mesmerized by promises and ideology that's been put out there. So that's actually what's happening, Prof. That's my understanding of it. And I refer to Stalin's chicken in my one book because that's exactly what's happening in South Africa.
You've just got on.
So as long as you're providing them with a couple of morsels of food, people will continue to vote. You can pluck them till they bleed, till they start screaming. Everybody knows the story about Stalin's chicken. Pluck the bird until it's bleeding and writhing in pain, but give it a couple of morsels of seed, and it will follow you and be loyal to you. And that's unfortunately what has happened with Dudumiyeni and Jacob Zuma.
Okay, well, I'm going to follow up with this question, and I hope I'm not going to get the response I'm expecting. But okay, so here was my question written before this session. Given that corruption in South Africa seems to filter down from the top, or at least, you know, very senior politicians and so on, do you think the future is bright for South Africa's fight against corruption? do you think that if they have committed the crimes that they're accused of, the likes of Dudu Mayeni and Ace Makashule and Jacob Zuma and so on will ever face justice? Or is the current President Ramaphosa's drive against corruption, ultimately in vain?
Thanks, Smart. I believe right now that the tide is turning. It may be slow and we're not seeing all the results, but I believe it's turning. One, we've seen with the local elections now. Yes, there was a bad turnout. Yes, not everyone voted, but we've never seen that that we have this issue now around the coalitions, and that the political parties need to start talking, and they need to hold good their promises. The second parties, I think, especially with the Zondo Commission, we've seen with the Marikana, the Murani, the Nugent Commission, nothing has really come from it. But the Zondo Commission has made so many people far more aware, because it was televised, because of the website, YouTube, all those mechanisms were easily available. And I think the country's far more aware now of the corruption. People haven't yet got the sense of standing up yet. There are many that are doing it, and we're seeing it in more civil societies taking action. So I foresee there will be a change. It's a bit slow. It's like turning the Titanic around. But once it's turned around, the process will accelerate. There are many people out there that are now taking cognizance, and I think we will start seeing the change that we would like to see. I believe it's incumbent on each one of us as citizens to encourage others to speak up if they notice anything. For one, even in their own streets, there's a pothole, reported. It's not that you're reporting a person, you're reporting something to be fixed, and you're holding people accountable. And that's what we need to do, is hold people accountable. We haven't held, in the past, none of those politicians have been held accountable. And we have citizens have that power. If we stand en masse, it will happen. No one foresaw that Jacob Zuma would have to step down. It was people had reached a point they just had enough, and when they stood up, they did it with their voices. And I think the time is there now that people need to stand up to make that change that we want to see. As Mahatma Gandhi says, be that change. Yeah.
Put the same question to anyone else. Prof. Ace.
Yeah, I think something that has become more and more important is that I think people would like to see President Ramaphosa acting more forcefully, because there are clear indications that there are members of his current cabinet who are implicated in various forms of wrongdoing. And I think he needs to start acting against those. Because, I mean, he needs to start doing what Avi de Klerk did, what nobody expected he would do, on the 2nd of February in 1990. What he did then, I think Ramaphosa needs to do something like that, act more forcefully, so that people can see, that people who are involved in wrongdoing. I mean, Ace Makashule was suspended, but it seems like his court case is going to drag on like Zuma's. It's just going to cost us millions, the country, millions and millions of rand, and nothing is ever going to happen. And we would like to see that stopping and people, actually being jailed for what they've done wrong. So I think that's the one important element. Another important element that I think, as far as whistleblowing is concerned, I think it's important that some kind of chapter 9 institution needs to be created for whistleblowers, that we have some kind of central whistleblowing authority that brings all the the different organizations that are working on protecting whistleblowers, bring them together and have a sort of like a consistent process that not only looks at protecting whistleblowers and providing some kind of financial compensation for whistleblowers to help them fight their cases, but also to investigate, to start these investigations going of the actual wrongdoing. Because what we've got to remember is whistleblowers can be mistaken. It's not the case that everything that people blow the whistle on are necessarily, that they might have this perception and they might be mistaken. But it's important that regardless, that those disclosures that they're making or those perceptions that they have, that those are investigated and that they are addressed. And if there is proof of wrongdoing, that wrongdoing is addressed and that we get rid of it. And I think that is very important.
Thank you, Prof. Interesting. My next question was going to be to the two speakers initially, and it was going to involve, what do you think we can do to help the plight of whistleblowers? And I take it that that's in part your answer is to set up a Chapter 9 institution. So will everyone remember that for the next question? But I've got two hands here. Angelo was first.
Do we have a future in South Africa? Yes, we do. However, there's only one way to do it. We need to transform this. I'm sorry if you can't see this clearly. That, all right, that needs to be transformed to that. Once we've done that in this country, I believe things will change. What needs to happen is our president, and I've challenged him before, and I'll challenge him again, needs to sit down with the whistleblowers. Forget about the special consulates, councils, and the high tax, the high fees that they pay, the Bain and Co's and all that type of thing. Sit down with the whistleblowers, hear from them what the situation is. You don't need to pay Bain or KPMG a fortune to find out what is wrong in your country. You need to sit with the people that have been through the mill, and they will tell you exactly. I can tell you exactly everything about that lady. I can tell you everything about this little gentleman here who should be in those uniforms. Everything. That's what he needs to do. He needs to sit and listen to us.
Well, yes, only the president isn't capable of putting people in prison. That's not what the president does. The separation of powers in this country, which I think is a wonderful thing, thank goodness. otherwise what might have happened over the previous decade or so. Yeah, I think part of my question, I didn't really express, but is what Ramaphosa is doing. So ostensibly, at least, President Ramaphosa is trying to combat corruption, right? I mean, they've put in these new rules for the ANC. You have to step aside, regulations, all of this kind of thing. There seem to be certain changes in the MPA, and I want to believe all of this. I want to believe all of this. Like the kind of positivity aspect of me wants to think, no, I think the current president, he's not the same as Mr. Zuma. He's got the best interests of the country at heart. That's what the optimist in me wants to see. But at the same time, there are stories about, okay, well, why are they trying to get rid of, let's say, Billy Downer, right? If you get rid of Billy Downer, you're only going to be replacing Billy Downer with someone else. And the sort of more negative side of me is thinking, well, do they have someone in mind? Is there someone in the MPA that they've got in mind to replace Billy Downer, who's on the payroll? Because this stuff seems to come from so high up, the impact of whistleblowers becomes in question. Does that make sense? I don't know. I really hope. Okay, so Cynthia has said it's delaying tactics by Mr. Zuma. Okay, so let's hope that's the right answer. Okay, Liezl.
I think when there's a okay, we first have to realize or understand that one swallow doesn't make a summer. Okay, so we have the president, and from what we see and what we hear, or mainly what we hear, you know, there is an inclination and a commitment to let's not use the word erode corruption, but to decrease corruption. But that is all fine. You know, those are words, like I've said before, it's words on paper. I know I said that this morning. It's words on paper. Where are the consequences? But then it's the same with Zondo. He's also saying the right things and things that we want to hear. But again, he's one swallow. And people need to come together. People at that level need to remove the politics and the political, can I say political affiliations, and think about the people of this country, and then work on solutions. Bring the whistleblowers in. Talk to, there are so many employees in organizations that know exactly what is happening there. I have written documents for the NPA and my colleagues as well for a new unit that they want to create, which entails setting up different whistleblowing mechanisms and things. But I'm still wondering, okay, that was now a year or 2 or 3 ago. Have anyone read it? That's what I'm asking after all the work that we've put into it. People have to come together, and people have to support the president, have to support Zondo, and I just think, remove all those, the politics, the party politics, and consequences. There must be consequences, and we know that, but the consequences must be quicker. That's the one thing I wanted to say. And then the other thing I wanted to say, when that was on Tina's comment and also on Cynthia's comment, is that, the citizens must stand up and do something. We must take to the streets, peaceful manner, and say what we want to say. That is how systems change eventually. It's a slow process. Tina made mention of the Chapter 9 institutions, and there has been many calls for that. I think Cynthia's movement also calls for, organization also calls for that. But until such time that we get there, there are other organizations that are trying, or like the Whistleblower House has been established. We are not at the point yet where we can offer what we want to offer, but our aim is to facilitate access to whistleblowers to legal advice, so that they pro bono legal advice, or get the funding so that the Whistleblower House can pay for that legal advice, and that it doesn't rest on the shoulders of the whistleblower. But then also that the whistleblower knows exactly what to say to whom, help with the affidavits, and so on. Facilitate access to mental assistance, to help with the post-traumatic stress disorder, to help with depression. There are many organizations that helps with legal services, but none of them provide access to the mental side of things. Okay, and then there's a couple of other things, but so there are efforts by civil society to help whistleblowers. It's just a pity that that our president has, in this last year, twice said that whistleblowers must be protected and so on, and going to look at the law. Deputy Chief Justice Zondo said the same kind of thing, but time is ticking. Nothing has been happening.
Thank you. And does anyone else have anything to add to that question? That issue? No. Okay. Let's move on then. So in terms of I wanted to ask about the physical safety of whistleblowers, because we know that Babita was murdered and others lives have been threatened and so on. Do you think that the state should be providing support in that way? So I don't really know what kind of support they would provide, but maybe, you know, to the extent of armed guards and this kind of thing, particularly you know, in the stage where Babita was at. Yes, Angela.
It's ludicrous. They don't provide protection for whistleblowers who are at most at risk, but yet we have entourages of blue light brigades. For what? For what? People don't want to talk about it, Prof, but for what? What do we need a minister who's supposedly appointed by the people, for the people, but yet must be protected from the people? Doesn't make sense, does it? It's actually quite sarcastic. And we all need to take a bit of a laugh at it because it's a fact. We're living in a fool's paradise. We have an entourage, especially here where I'm staying now. I see them coming past up to 10 vehicles, but there's no protection from whistleblowers. Let me give you another laughing point to make it a bit light-hearted. I am lying dead in an ambulance on a gurney, buck naked, shackled to the gurney, on my way from Groenewald Hospital to Fourways Life Hospital. They give me an escort of 15 blue lights, but I'm dead, literally in the ambulance. Does it make sense? But we cannot provide, and we should have provided security to Babita Deokaran, and we failed her. We failed the family. I say shame on you, Cyril Ramaphosa. Shame on Becky Cele for what they've done. It's despicable. But yet they will make sure that their kids are taken to school in blue light brigades. For what? For what is despicable?
I would suggest, Angelo, that they're not protecting themselves against the population. They're protecting themselves against other prospective ANC councillors and given what happens in KZN, given what happens on election time, it's not the people they have to worry about, it's the politicians. Yeah. Well, thank you, everyone. This has been wonderful. It's 4 o'clock. We are out of time. I don't know if anyone would like to offer some closing thoughts, but I'll give you all the opportunity to.
If I may go, because I've got another appointment, I'd just like to thank everybody. It's been enlightening, it really has. To the professors, to Cynthia, who also consider a professor, you know, well done, and I hope, you know, and I know this is going to go somewhere, and I know it's going to make a difference. So well done to you for assisting us in having our voice heard. I really appreciate it. I really do. Grazie mille, and thank you, and good night, everybody.
Bye-bye, Angelo. I'll go next, Ben. All that I can say as a concluding remark is Aluta continua. That's that.
Thank you, Liezl.
Thanks, Helga. So thank you very much to you, Jay, and Professor Smart, and Professor Ace and Liezl for having us. For us, it's always great to get our voices heard and the plight of whistleblowers out there, and also use it as a platform to encourage whistleblowers. And again, just to say that we must see ourselves first as South Africans, rather than across the racial, culture, color lines. And once we start seeing ourselves as South Africans, truly South African, we will stand together. We know the feeling. We've experienced it during the World Cup Soccer 2010. We've experienced it with the Rugby World Cup 1995. We've seen pockets of those successes, and I feel that's what we need to see, because in the heart of hearts, we don't want to be hurting our neighbor. and our politicians are creating divisions amongst us, and we mustn't allow it. And we must just stand together and say, we want this to be a safe environment, a corrupt-free environment, and we want our children and our grandchildren to have a quality of life in this country. Thank you.
Thank you, Cynthia.
Yeah, I would just like to say, yeah, thank you for this opportunity to talk about it. And I've been thinking about protection for whistleblowers and thinking about why we're waiting for this Chapter 9 institution that we hope will be created at some stage. Perhaps all of us who are involved with organizations, with civil society organizations that do provide protection, or some form of protection, perhaps we should work together and create some kind of database that makes it available, that we can make available to prospective whistleblowers, that they know who to contact and where to go with their stories and what kind of advice they can get. So that's perhaps something that the three of us can start working on, and Angela, the four of us can start working on. And then also involve other organizations like PLAV, Corruption Watch, Right to Know, OTA, and so on.
That's a great
idea. I think it's necessary to start actively doing something.
That's a great idea. Thank you so much, Tina. And I'd just like to thank everyone who came along to watch. This has been recorded and will be shared widely on various media platforms, social media platforms, and so on and so forth. I'd like to thank our speakers. I'd like to thank our panelists. And I'd like to thank Anthony Kazaboni, who played a huge role in organizing this event and putting it together. Thank you very much, Anthony. And in that, I think we shall close the session.
The University of Johannesburg, the future reimagined.